Hello, and welcome to everybody, wherever you might be. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. We're delighted that there's so many, few hundred of you joining us this morning, and it is truly global, everywhere from Rio de Janeiro to Port Vila in Vanuatu. Welcome, and delighted that you could join us for this important webinar. We're going to be looking at a report published by the UN Environment Programme's Life Cycle Initiative about the environmental impact of single-use nappies and their alternatives. My name is Schanschieff, and I'm chair of the Nappy Alliance, which I set up in 2003 with others to ensure that nappies are part of the debate around the environment, around waste, cost to consumers, governments, and health aspects. Personally, I've been in the nappy industry for over 30 years. Back in 1992, I set up a nappy laundry service based in the Midlands in the UK, which I ran for 5 years before my wife and I started Bambino Mio, again based in the UK, but selling to over 80 countries around the world. And certainly from an industry point of view, consumer interest has never been greater in the products that we sell. And the important issue of nappies in the debate around single-use plastics and waste. And it's very exciting, having been in the industry for 30 years, to be getting much more attention from policymakers on this really important issue. We've got a fantastic panel of speakers across a range of experience and within this area, and it's wonderful to see so many people from such a diverse range of sectors, of geographies, who have been able to join us to take part, to hear what's being said, but also hopefully in be able to raise questions and take part in the debate. So the first part of the event will be a presentation on the report itself, and then we'll have questions and answers on that. We'll then open up the conversation and invite a couple more people, a couple more speakers onto the panel for some more discussion. So I'll now hand over to Claudia, to Philippa and Suzanne to introduce themselves, and then Claudia will be able to present her information on the report. Claudia.
Thank you very much, Guy, and welcome everyone. It's really an honor to be here today, and it's great to see so many of you connected. My name is Claudia Giacovelli. I'm based in the Paris office of the United Nations Environment Programme as part of the Life Cycle Initiative. And I've been leading the work on single-use plastic product pollution, and I will be presenting to you shortly some of the key findings of our report on nappies. Thank you.
Thanks. Hello and welcome everybody. I'm Philippa Notten. I'm a director at the research consultancy called TGH ThinkSpace, with a sort of a specialization, I guess, and focus in life cycle assessment. And we were contracted, we have been working with UNEP Life Cycle Initiative to do the work. So I was the lead researcher and author of the report.
Hello everybody, my name is Suzanne. I am assistant professor at the Federal University of Rio. I am teaching life cycle assessment, and I'm researching on innovation and sustainability, and especially also on grassroots movements. And this is my context at this panel. Thank you very much for joining us, and thank you. It's a great honor and a great pleasure to contribute.
Okay, so thank you so much. I guess I just want to confirm that my screen view is visible for everybody. Okay, I see nodding, so that's great. So as we said, the first part of this webinar will be really to take you through a little bit what we found in this report. So this is what we have been looking at is really to try and compare the environmental impacts of single-use nappies versus their alternatives. And we have drawn recommendations from a life cycle perspective. This report was developed by the Life Cycle Initiative, which is an initiative hosted by UN Environment Program, the UN Environment Program. And it's great that we have also Philippa with us today, as she's in fact the lead author of this report. So just briefly on the Life Cycle Initiative, it's a multi-stakeholder partnership that promotes the uptake of life cycle knowledge by private and public decision makers. And we try to really build consensus and make sure that policies are science-based. So there is life cycle science behind policy decision. In terms of to give you a bit of context of why did we decide to undertake an analysis of, from a life cycle perspective of nappies, is mostly was driven by the fact that, in fact, single-use nappies are really a substantial contributor to plastic waste globally. And not only that, but really they are a leading cost for a lot of local authorities that are often the ones tasked with their disposal. If we look a bit at the numbers, there are pretty much 33 billion single-use nappies that are estimated to be consumed on an annual basis in the EU alone, which this results basically in a huge amount of waste, 6.7 million tons of waste annually. And so we decided to look a little bit and summarize what is the current knowledge that was available from a life cycle perspective on the environmental performance of nappies, single-use nappies versus the alternatives that are available out there, with the hope that we could assist policymakers and consumers to make informed choices. This work on nappies is part of a bigger work that we are doing on single-use plastic products. In fact, it's a request that we received from member states as part of our, so from countries, as part of the 4th session of the UN Environment Assembly. In March 2019, countries asked UNEP to collect information and recommendation on how to best address single-use plastic product pollution. So we have gone ahead and looked at the life cycle from a life cycle perspective. What are the difference between single-use versus reusable alternatives on various products? So we have looked at the shopping bags and bottles, takeaway packaging containers, caps, tableware. Nappies is a product that is part of this bigger work, and we'll soon be publishing also a report on menstrual products, face masks, and next year we are basically about to start also working on supermarket food packaging to compare again the footprint of single-use option versus their alternatives. We have tried to look a little bit already at what are the high-level considerations that we could draw from all the studies that we have so far conducted. And in fact, what we have found is that when we look at single-use plastic products, it's really the single-use nature of product that is the most problematic for the environment, more so than the material that they are made of. So what we recommend is really for member states, so for countries, to promote and encourage, take action that lead at keeping the product and resources at the highest value for as long as possible in the economy. So really looking at transitioning toward a circular economy approach. And certainly we also have found that taking a life cycle approach can really help to take the right decision and to avoid burden shifting. But just briefly, because in the audience there might be somebody that is not so familiar with the life cycle thinking approach. So when we talk about life cycle thinking, we basically are looking at the environmental impact of a product or a service along its entire life cycle, from extraction of the resources to the manufacturing, use phase, until the end of life. So it is possible that instead, if you focus on a certain life cycle stage, you might be transferring burden to another life cycle stage. So that's why it's so important to look at the entire life cycle. So going back to our study, what did we look at for this nappy? So we didn't conduct a life cycle assessment, a new life cycle assessment, but we took all the available knowledge on that was published, peer-reviewed studies published in English, comparing single-use and reusable nappies. These are all recent studies that were published between 2005 and 2020, and we found 6 from various geographic locations, so Europe, South America, Australasia. And the product that we considered in this study is basically the single-use standard nappies, single-use glueless nappies, the bio-based single-use nappies, and then the reusable cloth nappies. So these are the 4 type of products that we considered. Just to give you an example of an LCA study that we considered in the meta-analysis, and it's great that Suzanne is with us today as well in the panel, because it's a study that was authored by her and some other colleagues. So it's a study that compares single-use nappies and reusable cloth nappies. And in particular, when comparing the reusable nappies, they look at comparing 3 potential innovative business model for the application of cloth nappies in Brazil. So the objective of the study was really to compare the performance of single-use nappies versus the 3 potential business model for cloth nappies. And these are nappy as a product, so the cloth nappy, so the reusable nappies sold to the parents, to the families, and they are washed at home. So this is the most standard nappy, reusable nappy model. The second possibility that was looked at was to have the nappy as a service, so which means the nappies are rented to consumers and consumer pay a monthly fee, but the nappies were washed on the site laundry. And the third business model considered was optimized nappy as service, which means that in that scenario, nappies were rented and consumers were paying a monthly fee, but nappies were washed off-site in an industrial laundry. So the key finding of this study that was comparing the single-use versus 3 potential business model for reusable nappies was that, in fact, the reusable nappy turned out to have lower ecosystem and human health impact, so lower environmental impact than the single-use nappy, doesn't matter what system of reusable nappy were used. But if we were to pick between the 3 different reusable system nappies, the optimized nappy as service, so where the nappies were then washed in efficient industrial laundry service, it was really the best for the environment in terms of having lowest ecosystem impact. And because this was due to the fact that water and energies are optimized. So between these 3 business models, in the case of Brazil, it was found that having this efficient industrial laundry service would be the best. So that was one example of a study that we analyzed in the meta-analysis. And this is pretty much this matrix that I'm presenting to you now. It's a tool that we developed to try and capture what does the science tell us. So given the LCA results that we analyzed, basically we try to map on the left-hand side all the consideration of geographical and technological context, and on the top bar we are mapping the consumer profile. So this tool would help policymakers and countries to try and place themselves and understand what would be the current optimal solution or better solution given their context. So if we take 2 examples, the 2 most extreme example, if we look in a country where there is advanced, and I'm looking at the bottom left corner of my screen, we see, first of all, let's look at the bigger picture. We have the blue boxes are reusable nappies are preferred. So overall, we see that the study found that reusable nappies are the preferred option in general. Just to learn how to read this matrix, we see that, for example, in a country where there is an advanced waste management system, a good policy that supports advanced waste treatment, so recycling, for example, and the consumer is a eco-conscious consumer. They wash efficiently using efficient laundry practices, then reusables are better. If instead we travel to the other extreme, where we have in a country, for example, where there is no formal waste management, and I'm now looking at the right and top corner of my screen. So we are in a context where there is no formal waste management and poor recycling support. At the same time, we have a consumer, most consumers that are indifferent, they dispose inappropriately of their nappies, which means that they are litter or flushed down the drain or disposed with recycling, so contaminating the recycling stream. And also in that case, we would recommend, for example, science tells us that it would be most recommendable to use reusable nappies, and so on and so forth. These are just two examples. But the report is already available of course, on our website, and you're most than welcome to check out the full report. What I want to share now is that, of course, we had the science. We looked at the science. We included the results of 6. So we consider 6 peer-reviewed LCA studies, but also to draw conclusion, we wanted to include in our considerations also elements that ensure that the products are validated in the market. So this is an example of a study that we also considered in order to help us draw recommendations that could be as global as possible. And this is the example of Vanuatu. Vanuatu, in fact, is the first, it's a small island developing state in the Pacific. And Vanuatu is the first, and again, it's great that we have today Rolf with us that will be able to share firsthand experience from Vanuatu. But just to share with you, Vanuatu is the first country to consider banning single-use nappies after they discovered that basically nappies account for 27% of the national solid waste stream. And there in the rural Vanuatu, unfortunately, burying single-use nappies on the shoreline was considered to be a safe and acceptable method of disposing nappies. So this study from Mama Leaf and Bambino Mio carried out in 2021, so very, very recent, wanted to test reusable nappy products. So the introduction of modern reusable nappies in Vanuatu. And this was done the test was run in 3 different communities on an island. And the test was done with over 60 families that documented their perspective. And in fact, what was found there is that more than the washing practices that might feel more of an overburden if we use reusable nappies, what was the biggest driver on the choice, basically, whether to go for single-use or reusable nappies for the family in Vanuatu was really the price, the access to nappies, so how easy it is to find a specific type of nappy in the city or in the town or in the shops, and the ease of use, so how easy and how well they absorb. So we also consider this study that was, for example, not an LCA, was not peer-reviewed, but is a very practical community-based study that has some very important conclusion that we wanted to draw within our considerations as well. So if we now look at the high-level funding of our report, of our meta-study, we have that, as I said, nappies, as any product, in fact, whether it's single use or whether it's reusable, they have an environmental impact. So what we can do is to try and minimize it. So reusable nappies have been found to have lower environmental impact than single-use nappies over most categories, but it's true that reusable nappies have their biggest impact happen during the use phase. So it really is down to us as consumers to improve how we wash it, how we use these nappies. So when we wash the nappies, for example, it would be best for us to wash at full loads, to choose water and energy efficiency machine if we are using machine, or to use lukewarm water if we are hand washing. So if we are using machine, wash below 60 degrees. Line drying nappies is much more energy efficient, and so that's preferable than to dry in a dryer, for example. And reusability. So the reusing nappies as many times as possible reduces the environmental impact as well. So it's important to make sure that we reuse the nappies on a second child, or we donate the stock once we have finished with our own family, etc. Or buy secondhand is also a great option to reduce the environmental impact. So if we are to instead look at the reductions of environmental impacts of single-use nappies, there is still an opportunity to reduce the environmental impact of single-use nappies if we design lighter products, because it means that lighter products require less raw material as an input, and the type of material used is also important. So glueless nappies, for example, score better than the traditional single-use nappies if we were to compare single-use products. And recycling of nappies is a new process, shows good results, but at the moment is only done in a pilot stage. So we have still quite a lot of barriers, economic and social, to overcome in that stream. If there are some policymakers in the audience, we drew some consideration, of course, that can help also shaping policy. So first of all, taking a life cycle perspective is essential for nappies, like for many other products. And in fact, what I was saying at the beginning, it's important to take a life cycle perspective to avoid shifting burden from one stage of the life of a product to the next. So if we look at the reusable nappies, the highest impact occur in the use phase, while for single-use nappies, the production of materials along with the management at the end of life are the most important life cycle stages. So which means that improvement can be made exactly in those stages where they impact the most on the environment. And a key difference between reusable and single-use nappies is really the fact that for reusable nappies, consumer has significantly more control over the environmental impacts of the nappies. While with what we said is that for single use is really more at the design phase and the production stage, and at the end of life, so disposal, recycling, and better managing the end of life cycle. What can policymakers do, and what can consumers really do? So education is very important. It's key to learn how to better wash and better use our reusable nappies. We need to encourage multiple reuses of the nappies, incentivize nappy service as business model, what we saw from the example from Brazil, for example, efficient laundering in the nappy as a service business. So businesses, we should incentivize businesses that are able to rent out nappies and then wash the nappies in an industrial laundry, for example. It's wonderful. We need to support efforts to transition to low carbon electricity and ensure access to clean water, because this is also important to make sure that we have an enabling environment for the uptake of reusable nappies. And of course, reusable nappies have a higher cost upfront, even if then it's discounted over the years of use, etc. But we should support poorer community and poorer consumers to help carry that higher upfront cost for reusable nappies. And finally, I would like to conclude with this high-level consideration. Really, what we found in all our studies, that there is no one single solution to single-use plastic product pollution, but the solution will be context and country specific. We are happy to provide support as much as we can, but what is important to remember also is that social considerations and gender norms are also very important in shaping the solutions. And so it's important that policymakers develop gender responsive policies to avoid overburdening a certain group of the population rather than the other. And with that, I would like to thank you very much for connecting, and I'm happy you are able to download the report here, and we'll be sharing the presentation afterward. So thank you very much. Looking forward to interact through the questions.
Claudia, that was great. Excellent presentation. Thank you very much. A couple of people have asked about the slides, and I think we've posted in the chat a link, so you can download those slides. Lots of questions coming in, and I'd encourage you, if anything comes to mind or it's prompted any questions in your mind, please post those in the chat, and hopefully we'll have time to ask those questions. So kicking off with the with questions, Pippa, I'm going to come to you first, if that's all right. What are the benefits and drawbacks for policymakers of using life cycle assessments to inform environmental policy development? And is there anything it misses?
Well, I'd say, I mean, the benefits, I think, is in the name, really, in the life cycle perspective that it takes. So, if you were looking life cycle, you want to identify where the biggest impacts are occurring across the value chain, so that you can then identify and implement those levers that can address those impacts. So it's really taking that view. So as Claudia, I think, covered this nicely or in depth, it's the use phase for the reusable. So that's where you need to focus, or it's on the end of life stage. So it's first knowing where to look and what needs to be done, where is the value that it brings, or where things perhaps get missed if you don't take the life cycle view. And the drawbacks is really that life cycle assessment cannot measure everything. And I think you have to be well aware that you need to bring the insights from life cycle assessment and combine it with wider environmental and socioeconomic studies in any policy development. So I think the big one that I think life cycle assessment practitioners are very well aware of is this problem of plastics in the environment is currently not well assessed by life cycle assessments. So sort of microplastics in marine environments, and that very active research area, but it is something that LCA currently misses.
Fantastic. A question for Suzanne from Cheryl Hadland from Tops Day Nursery in the UK. What's the distance between the industrial laundry and the home or the day nursery considered in the 3 business models?
The distance in terms of water use and energy use, I guess, is the question.
Yeah.
Well, we try to model equipment we are using in Brazil. So we have in Brazil, when we look at commercial laundries, we have 2 types of laundries. We have laundries which are quite inner city laundries, which people use, like, it's the typical laundry service. And this laundry service has washer extractor machines. These washer extractor machines are quite the same that you use at home, and they have quite the same water and energy consumption. They are a little bit more efficient, but it's not a big difference. When we look at tunnel washers, which are the industrial type of laundries, these laundries generally cope with hospital laundry, hotellery stuff. And they use basically 1/3 of water. So they are a lot more water efficient because they have a lot of water reuse facilities in their concept. And since our main energy use is because of water heating, because when you have when you have a common laundry, you have to wash at 60 degrees. You can wash at ambient temperature when you wash at home, because there's no concern about hygiene. But when you have a shared washing service, so you have to wash at high temperature. And this is why the water use actually, that our energy use depends on our water use. So when we can reduce the water use to 1/3, we can also reduce the energy use to 1/3. This is basically the difference. And this is why this concept would be very interesting, but it needs a high scale. So this is our big obstacle here.
So just following on from that, just to sort of on Cheryl's question, I think she specifically wanted to know about when you did the life cycle report. Did you look at the distance travelled?
Oh yeah, sure. We looked at the distance travelled. When we look at an urban context, the distance is not that big. We have a distance about 50 or 60 kilometers, perhaps. This should be the biggest distance you could run, because actually these in industrial type laundries, they are not located in the city center, but they are not that far outside. We have these kind of laundries all over the city because of their importance for hospitals and hotels. So it's not, you have to go further for waste, right? Our landfills are a lot farther outside than industrial laundries.
Fantastic.
But, yeah.
But just picking up at a point that you made about sort of washing temperature, and I'll open up this to the whole panel. Katharina from the University of Johannesburg has asked, are there hygienic implications if reusable nappies are washed below 60 degrees? I know you touched on that, Suzanne. I don't know whether anybody else has got anything to add to that, to elaborate on that particular point.
May I?
Yes.
May I start? Well, actually, when washing nappies at 20 degrees or at normal temperature, you could actually keep some microbes. And this is not, when we talk to our grandmothers who use these nappies on like a regular basis, they are quite shocked when you tell them that you wash them cold, because for these generations, it was common to use reusable nappies, and it was absolutely normal to wash them at high temperatures, in order to really guarantee that there is no possible contamination. What is the point? From my experience, when we look at like 3 or 4 generations back, antibiotics haven't been common. So you have a slight risk for especially how do I say this? For infections from the urinary tract, for babies. There is this slight risk, but it's actually very low risk, and that we can today run. It is absolutely common that when you have only your when you wash at home, it's absolutely common to wash at cold temperatures, and it's not it doesn't really get to these urine infections, but there is a risk. This is why when we share nappies, we have to wash at high temperatures, because then you don't want to run this risk when you have a lot of mixed microbes, right, from different families. But for the use at home, it is absolutely common in all the grassroots movements that we can see all over the world to wash at normal temperatures, because the risk is very low. There's not a zero risk, but it's very low.
Fantastic, thank you. Another question, which I'll direct at Philippa, only because it's a question that's come from South Africa, so that seems right. From Chris White at Donji Linden Corporation. Have there been any discussions on the use of biodegradable materials that allow single-use nappies to decompose quicker in landfill?
Yes, we did. So just as background, our report, because it was a meta-analysis, we were restricted by the LCA studies that were out there. So we weren't doing the studies, as Claudia pointed out. We were, what was in the literature. So we were somewhat only able to include what other researchers have already done life cycle assessments on. But yes, we did have one that looked at bioplastic, had a bioplastic or increased bioplastic component of the nappy. And it did have favorable results, but with LCA, it's a lot of trade-offs between impacts. So biodegradable plastics often have higher impacts in some ways and improvements in others. But it was very much how it ended up in end of life was I think the conclusions from that study. So there, if you have a biodegradable nappy and it does actually end up in an industrial composting facility, it will have a improved environmental impact over a single-use plastic nappy in a landfill or in. But the crux is most countries don't have that industrial composting infrastructure. So at this stage, and I mean, these are obviously in development and it may improve and change as technology improves, but currently biodegradable plastics, if they land up in a normal landfill, or worse, if they land up in a river or on a stream bank, something, they have no benefits compared to single-use plastic nappies. So it really comes down to, will there be that infrastructure for industrial composting to be able to take bioplastic nappies?
Claudia, have you got anything you want to sort of add to that? The debate around biodegradable materials and compostable is always one that is out there, and actually, having been in the industry a long time, it's all about education. It's all about making sure that consumers have the right information and understand exactly what these terms mean. Claudia, do you have anything that you wanted to add to that answer?
But exactly what Pippa said, really, it's a big debate, and there is a bit of confusion, we feel, in terms of what does it mean biodegradable? How do we define it? And there is not a standardized definition just yet. There are attempts, but there is not a standardized definition, and it is unclear yet on how this is communicated to consumers. So the confusion is also there in terms of what do people understand when we say this is biodegradable? It doesn't mean that if we throw it in the environment, it just disappears in normal condition. There might be some criteria there where it needs anyways very high temperature, etc. So littering is still not a good option. So the consumer information and education on not littering and better disposal is very key. And then composting most likely will be not home composting in most cases. Of the currently available product, we are still talking about they are compostable in an industrial composter. So it goes back to what Pippa was saying. It's important that if the products are commercialized and are available to the market and consumer prefer to go for those, we need to make sure that also we support from the infrastructure perspective to make sure that there is indeed industrial composting and collection of those of that specific waste streams.
Fantastic, thank you. Right, Claudia, I'll stick with you and move on to another question from Juliette Rayner at ERIC. Please, could you describe a little more about the production stage of reusable nappies and how specifically this is more environmentally friendly than the production stage of a single-use nappy?
So it's not just the stage in itself. What we said is that we are looking at the entire life cycle. So in terms of hotspots, so what we call in a life cycle inventory, we would identify what are the hotspots. So the steps in the life cycle of a product where the most environmental impact happen. So if we look at a reusable nappy, we found that the hotspot would be more on the use phase. Rather, so the other stage doesn't mean that they don't have environmental impacts. It's just that the biggest environmental impact happen during the use phase if we look at reusable nappies. Instead, if we take a single-use nappy, the hotspot along the value chain and along the life cycle of a single-use nappy, the hotspot would be really found around the design stage and manufacturing, the design stage, in fact, the production phase versus, and that is including, for example, cotton production, which is quite heavy, and the end of life disposal. So it's not that we are not comparing the production phase of single use versus the production phase of reusable. We are comparing the life cycle of reusable versus the life cycle of single use.
Fantastic, thank you. We've got lots of questions coming in that that sort of touch on broader issues, the report, but sort of wider than the report. So I'd like at this point, if possible, to bring in our other two panelists, Larissa from Zero Waste Europe and Ralph from Vanuatu. It would be great if, before we move on to some more questions, if you could just briefly introduce yourselves. First Larissa and then Ralph, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Hello, everyone. So my name is Larissa. I'm a consumption production campaigner at Zero Waste Europe. So Zero Waste Europe is an NGO, Brussels-based, and we are based in Brussels, but we have a network of organizations working in Europe towards ending waste, reduction of waste, and towards zero waste. Thank you.
Hello, I am Ralph Regenvanu. I am a member of parliament in the Republic of Vanuatu, which is a small archipelago of islands in the South Pacific Ocean, about, I would say, 3 hours flight from Australia to the east. I'm the member of parliament for Port Vila, which is the main city and the main source of plastic pollution, marine litter pollution, pollution that goes into the ocean. And I used to be in government up until the last general election last year. And in that period, we made the plan to introduce the world's first ban on single-use disposable nappies. Since that time, I'm in opposition. I'm the leader of the opposition at the moment, and we are monitoring that plan. Thank you.
Fantastic, thank you. Ralph, I'm gonna kick off with you if that's okay. As you say, Vanuatu is the only nation in the world that has taken the step to lay out plans to ban single-use nappies. Couple of questions. What led the government at that time to make that decision, and what have been the political challenges in trying to implement it?
Well, the idea of banning disposable nappies is part of a longer term and progressive ban of single-use plastic items. So back in 2018, we started the rollout of the bans, and the first ban we passed was on single-use plastic shopping bags, styrofoam takeaway containers, and plastic straws, and we became the first country in the world to ban plastic straws. And then in 2019, the second rollout, and it was fruit packaging from supermarkets, styrofoam trays, and the covering for the fruit that is often cut up and put on those trays and sold. Also, single-use disposable plates, cups, knives, forks, spoons, all of that, stirrers, egg cartons, and also plastic flowers. So the next stage in the rollout was nappies, scheduled for December last year, simply because from the research we found that disposable nappies were one of the single major items ending up in our landfills and also ending up in the ocean. Vanuatu is a very small country, very low level of industrialization. All of the plastic is imported. We don't actually generate any in the country. So it's a very easy policy option just to stop them coming in. And so we did a lot of consultation with the various companies that bring the plastic in, and that's how we got to the stage we got to. With the nappies were definitely the most contentious item. All the others were fairly straightforward. Nappies were contentious, particularly for young parents, because we have a very, very we have a very young population in Vanuatu. We're a third world developing country. Very young population, lots of young parents. Being the member of parliament for Port Vila, the main city, gave me a bit of a unique perspective, because the main city is where most of the imported plastic comes in and is used, and so it's the main source of the waste. And so I made sure I was very on top of the issue with the people of the city who were the main users of single-use plastics, and we found that there was a lot of support for the ban, more than the opposition. Also from women as well as men. Some women were some of the greatest advocates for the ban, simply because of the low level of industrialization, the high environmental integrity of our country, which is one of the main features of our development, is the degree to which we maintain the environmental integrity. And so the other bans are much easier to pass. This was the more contentious one. And then when we went out of government at the beginning of about April last year, the new government came in and they decided not to implement the ban in December last year. And it may just be because they were against anything we did previously, possibly. But in a way, it's also a blessing, because we have had more time now to look at how we can implement it properly. And one of the main challenges we face is providing the alternative. As I say, we don't manufacture any of these kind of products in the country. It all has to be imported. We do have now a local manufacturer, and they're the ones that are referred to in the study that Claudia was presenting, Mama's Life Vanuatu. It's a very small operation which manufactures on a very cottage scale reusable nappies, and they're starting to sell them. Their aim is to try and provide a starter pack of nappies to every baby that's born in the country. So very ambitious. And the big challenge is the cost. It's not so much the use of water and those other issues. That the pilot survey identified that the main challenge was not in terms of washing or those kind of issues, access to water. It was much more the cost. And it definitely is going to require, from policymakers, from the government, there's going to need to be a financial subsidy provided. There's going to be support needed so that we can make sure that these products become affordable, at least right at the beginning, so that savings are made, which can then, as in Mama's Life plan, once you provide a starter pack to a newborn baby, that saves the family the money of having to buy single-use nappies, and allows them to save up to then start purchasing the next size up of nappy for the growing child. So these are all issues we're trying to work out, but clearly the financial subsidy is the key way to make this policy work.
Yeah, thanks for that. That's great. Just a follow-up question, because it has come up from a couple of people, and it came up earlier. Just in Vanuatu, why do you consider the reusable solution as the solution? Have you considered compostables and biodegradable single-use nappies?
As I said, we don't manufacture much in Vanuatu at all. We import most of the kind of the Western consumer goods. We're a very new consumer society. In fact, I would say we're not really a consumer society. We are in the main city where I am. But to consider such solutions, you have to actually be making nappies, right? So we have no tradition of making nappies. Single-use nappies came in Vanuatu a bit later than anywhere else in the world. And previous to that, there was cloth nappies, and that's what everyone's familiar with. I think the biodegradable solution is not something that's really come up on the radar much, in terms of we don't have the capacity even to make cloth nappies. We can't do that. We don't have the capacity locally. So it's really something that is outside the scope of what can be done in the country.
Larissa, if I can turn to you, single-use plastics have been a hot topic for a few years now, but nappies have until recently not been very visible as part of that discussion. Are we starting to see a change in this in NGO campaigning and at policy level?
Yeah, so I can say a bit about the European perspective, because we work here in Europe with the European Commission, the Parliament, etc. And indeed, there was a lot of focus with the Single-Use Plastic Directive that we're following. And in most, like the top 10 marine litter items found at EU beaches. But here, nappies was not one of the top 10 items. Menstrual products, yes, but nappies, no. And other products that you may know, straws, etc. So, for instance, what we are trying to showcase is, for instance, the campaign we did this year on the Reusable Nappy Week, etc., is that single-use nappy, well, is a single-use plastic as well. And it does not make sense to not also tackle this issue. You know, it's not only because it's not a marine litter issue in Europe. But so there's opportunity to address this through a policy perspective, because the European Commission has some goals, for instance, that by 2030, all products placed in the market should be circular, fair, and safe. And as well, in the circular economy action plan, they have addressed it and strong, put some focus on waste prevention and reuse of products, etc. So there's a willing to address this issue, but we need to push because indeed, as we have already heard from Half as well in Vanuatu, it's really important to have financial support for this business, for this, for instance, washing systems to become a reality. Otherwise, they cannot compete with the price of plastic, of single-use plastic. There are already a lot of initiatives in many member states, for instance, in France, in Belgium, the UK, in Spain, of these washing facilities, laundry systems for washing nappies, which is one of the most, environmental friendly to have these facilities. But there are some, they are facing many challenges regarding financial challenges, and have been in touch, for instance, with some of them, and they said that now with this biocompostable nappy as well, consumers are a bit confused or unsure about really going for reusable nappies or composting. But there is this issue that consumers doesn't know that, or most of them doesn't know that we need a proper separate collection of these compostable nappies, that we need infrastructure to really industrial composting facilities for compostable nappies to really compost, etc. So this is an issue we need to inform consumers and really push for policy change at the European level and then political level, government level.
And Larissa, in terms of the biodegradable, compostable, and as you say, it's an information thing. Do you or Zero Waste Europe have a view in terms of how that education should take place? What information is it that's not out there that's affecting consumer choice?
Yeah, so this is still super confusing because indeed we don't have a definition really on the biodegradable plastics, and it should come first of all from the government to really define and do not allow business or their companies to label their products as biodegradable, as compostable, etc., without really being sure that it's going to the right place, etc. Because many things we see, if you go to the market, etc., we see these products compostable in nature or something like that, or it's really misleading for consumers. They can think they can just throw out there and it's going to disappear, and it's not what happens.
Yeah, and I think, and we see that not just in the confusion of from consumers in terms of knowing what the right thing to buy or use on their baby. It's also that confusion that then comes through for local authorities in terms of recycling and contamination of recycling, where parents think that it is possible to recycle disposable nappies and they go in the wrong bin and the wrong collection and contamination. So that the evidence is out there, as you say, about the confusion. Larissa, I've got another question from Lizzie Kenyon at Keep Britain Tidy. Her question is, our research at Keep Britain Tidy has found that there is considerable confusion about UK nappy users about whether or not they are recycled. And this is a key driver in people incorrectly putting disposable nappies into recycling bins and sacks. How can that be addressed? I think we've sort of touched on it, but is there anything else you want to add to what you said on that?
Well, so recycling of nappies, then this is I've heard this is happening in some countries, but it's still quite complex, and I'm not sure if it's completely, I mean, not the best case scenario, I would say. So it needs a lot of structure, and also, as I said, separate collection is key. So if you put the disposable nappies together with the residual waste, it likely is going to be landfilled or incinerated. So even like for recycling, you need a separate collection. If it's not a bag for nappies being recycled, likely it's not going to be, even though there's a structure being developed in the country where, yes.
So moving on to something else, and this is sort of a question for everybody if someone wants to pick this up. We've had a few questions come in on early potty training, known as elimination communication. One from Peter Williams at the RCA and one from Irina at Zero Waste. The average amount of time that children spend in nappies is increasing, despite the known environmental, health, social and financial benefits of earlier training. How can we ensure that earlier training is not overlooked in policy? Claudia, do you want to?
Sure, thanks. And I think I don't know whether my response, I tried to type also some responses in the Q&A box. I don't know whether they've been received, but happy to take the point as well, because it might be of interest to other people as well. So what I was saying is that in the example of the study from Suzanne that I shared in my presentation, basically that LCA study particularly considers a functional unit the number of, again, that study was particularly comparing single-use nappies with 3 business model of using reusable, or how to use reusables. And in that case, the unit that was considered is basically the average amount of nappies that is required by child from when he's born to 2.5 years, so 2.5 years, which is considered at the moment to be the average age that a child will then move to normal, will no longer need nappies. So at the moment we consider 2.5 years the average age at which basically potty training has been completed. And I believe that, yes, it is an important point to try and train kids earlier, but at the moment all the guidelines and recommendations are, well, we put enough stress on the kids already on many different fronts, and I'm not so sure that for all the guidelines we receive at the moment, we try to, from what we see, is really to try and maintain this as the most natural process. We as parents can for sure help and facilitate the process, but I'm not sure we would really improve on an average age below 2.5 years when the child is really ready and prepared. At the moment, so 2.5, in fact, 3 years old is when normally the kids will enter in maternal school, and that's when it's by law required basically that the child, as we say in France, est propre. It means it's proper, so it will no longer need nappies. So I think that's pretty much my comment to that. I think 2.5 is still a fair average, and I don't see how policy could really push further down that year.
May I add
yes,
a little comment to that?
Are you going to add to that?
because it's actually, I think it's a very interesting question. When you look at consumer experiences, it seems like, and I said it seems like because I don't think that we have any really robust statistics about that. It seems like children with the closed diaper experience, they get proper, they are potty trained earlier because they perceive when they are getting wet. When you use modern disposable diapers, which work with super absorbents, they are never wet. And they don't really, so it's more difficult for a child to understand what it means to go on the toilet when you use these modern disposable diapers. This is why generally it's said that children with closed diapers get potty trained with about 2 years already. So it's actually an interesting side effect of closed diapers that they help to train your child. But actually, and this is another point that I think is interesting, we don't have robust statistics about that. It isn't studied that well in terms of the consumer perspective. So I think it would be actually a very interesting thing for scientists to do, to really try to get robust statistics about that. Like, what is the difference in terms of potty training, but also what is the difference in terms of consumer experience? Because I actually see at this point one of the biggest obstacles, really the consumer perception of closed nappies. So you have a very high resistance to this. What seems to most of our consumers something very old school and very old fashioned, and absolutely not. Like there's, it's not about technology here. So what we are going back now to the technologies of our grandparents, it's not possible. This is what I perceive a lot in consumer experience. So I think we should focus a bit more on that, really. Look at how this alternative dialogues with consumers.
And if I may add another comment, just to make sure that my point comes across correctly, is that also as kids become closer to the potty training age and to lose the diaper, basically, it's also true that they consume less amount of diapers in general. So that is one consideration in terms of the older the kid is, so closer to the 3 years, 2.5 years, 3 years, they are consuming anyways a much lower amount of diapers, whether they're reusable or single use, than they would do in the first 2 years of their life. And the other thing, what I wanted to say before, is that I find it difficult, it might be extremely sensitive for policymakers to take a stand on this point, but it comes down again to consumer education and consumer willingness to perhaps consider moving forward the age at which they start the potty training.
And I noticed in the chat that this has prompted some discussion. From our point of view, we've actually recently done some research with YouGov in the UK, proving that point about early potty training and getting some data on that, which is quite interesting, and Suzanne supports what you say. If we can move back, Philippa, to the actual research and the report. This question comes from Robert Holdway at Giraffe Innovation. Did any of the research find reliable LCA or other technical data on the benefits or the disbenefits of recycling plants for single-use nappies, including plastic reclaim and onward applications?
Yeah, so one of the studies that is included in the meta-analysis is on, has recycling as an option at end of life. It was an Italian case study, set in Italy as a case study. And it found improvement, overall benefits, certainly compared to a conventional single-use disposal. So I think it looked at it only at the end of life stage, that study. So it looked at recycling compared with incineration or landfilling. And recycling indeed came out the best. But then that, and then in other literature, not necessarily life cycle literature, but there are other studies that have looked into alternative end of life of nappies, be it recycling or something like as a refuse derived fuel or something like that. But all of those studies, I think there's actually a meta study on that as well, really highlighted the fact that it's not so much the technologies, which are quite well developed and successfully demonstrated, but it's the logistics. And I think Larissa touched on this. It's how to have successful recycling of nappies, or you will need separate collection of nappies. And the problem there is the storage of nappies. So being something that's smelly and not nice to have in your household, how do you, and also as a health risk, how do you successfully implement a successful collection? So it's one thing when it's your plastic containers that you can rinse and they're sitting there in your recycling bin. It's a different aspect when it's used single-use nappies. So it's really around the logistics and the infrastructure, less so actually, I think, at this stage than the technologies for using single-use nappies at end of life, or advanced recycling technologies.
Fantastic. Claudia, Suzanne, anything you wanted to add to that? No.
Sorry, yes, because recycling is something what I find a very important topic, because the problem, I think one of the major problems for recycling actually is finding the market for the recycled products, and actually costs also. So even I think one important point is also, yes, we can recycle nappies, but what are we going to do with this recycled material? So are we really looking at a closed loop? This would increase the cost of nappies, because to recycle them is more expensive than to produce, like the polypropylene, the super absorbent. It's technologically, it's possible, but economically, it's feasible. So I think this is a very important question also when we look at recycling. Does it make sense from an economical point of view? Or would it be more interesting than to go to compostables, right? So this is, I think, that one of our great problems from recycling is the cost. And then when we do have the recycled product, is this product, what is the quality of this product, and what kind of products can we produce with this recycled material? Is it really possible to close the loop? It's not always, because the quality of the materials is very high. It's a very important issue. So this is just one point I think we always have to point out when we're talking about recycling, because recycling industry, the petrochemical industry loves this topic, but they are not really sincere about it.
Thank you. We've got two questions here, which I will probably direct towards Ralph, if that's okay, which will become obvious when I ask the second question. So the first question, which comes from, I think, Juncker, I hope I pronounced that right, at UNED. Could you kindly elaborate on the gender dimension of the policy option to select one type of nappies over another? Using reusable nappies might put additional burden on mothers, who are often the ones to use them and clean them. And there's a second question that sort of relates to this, and the reason for sort of directing it at Ralph, from Thomas Mays. One of the comments on reusable diapers is about how time demands conflict with gains freedom in developing countries. How will we overcome this conflict, Ralph?
Well, it's of course a consideration, and the only way we have been able to try and deal with it is the only way you can do it, which is through consultation and piloting and awareness. And I think the pilot study that was done with Mama's Life, which is included in the study, went through all of those issues. Most of the consultation piloting was with women, because almost 100% they're the ones who deal with nappies and babies and so on. So I think the results from the study will speak for themselves if people have a chance to look at the study. What the women in the communities that were consulted about and did the pilot but were raising as issues, the time they spent with dealing with nappies. I think that's all I can say on it. As a policymaker, we need to rely on consultation and studies and see if we can find the best option to move forward in terms of making decisions about what's how do we deal with the issue of marine litter when the use in the community is so high of these products?
Thank you. Larissa, had a few questions on the impact of different materials. Claudia mentioned that one of the main findings from all this work is that single use is more of a problem than plastic. Somebody's asked, what about disposable baby nappies containing fibers such as bamboo, hemp, etc.? Are these better?
Yeah, well, I'm not really a material expert, but from maybe a perspective, from a circular economy perspective, well, a single use usually does not make sense. Like, to produce a material, we have seen that the production of single-use nappies in the report is one of the most impactful stage. So you're gonna use a lot of energy, a lot of water and everything, all the resources to produce a material that's going to be used only once and throw away. So this is more or less the logic that we have to think about when you use this single-use material, about the impacts. And yeah, and regarding the other type of materials in nappies, that I'm not sure if I can answer that. Maybe someone else can.
Claudia, did you want to pick up on the fabrics point?
So basically, in the studies that we considered for the meta-analysis, we have also studies that compare various options between single use. And what we found is basically what I shared earlier, is that if we are to compare single use with single use, so overall, our recommendation is still that reusables is preferred to single use. But if we are to look only at single use, then the glueless nappies, for example, score better than the traditional nappies. The more natural material, the point is, again, goes back to the conversation we were having before. Are these to be considered as a compostable nappies? Are we moving into the compostable basically scenario? Then we would need to make sure that they are disposed of properly without contaminating the recycling stream, and that the infrastructure for compostable nappies is available. Then otherwise there is really not much difference between a traditional single-use nappy and a more technologically advanced, for example, alternative material single-use nappy. The consideration that we have made, the finding that we have, is that between single-use nappies, the lighter the product, the better. And yes, it is what we found is that also it's true that if we are to compare basically the bio-based nappies are preferred, for example, looking at what the science tells us, in a case where we are in a advanced waste management system, and unfortunately consumers are still not washing efficiently, or the reusable nappies would be only reused few times. So again, lack of consumer information. Then in that case, if we are to prefer single-use nappies, the bio-based nappies would score better.
Thank you. A question, Pippa, from Charlotte Neal. There are many masters and PhD students currently focusing on researching disposable diapers. Could you kindly indicate what gaps in literature you struggled with during the LCA? What information should be generated that would be of value?
So specifically with the disposable, so with the single use, I'd say the end of life is not well modeled. So certainly when you look at LCAs, they tend to or always model the expected, or let's say the desired end of life. So we have a study that looks and says that 100% of the nappies are in a sanitary landfill at end of life, or if it's a European context, they'll say they're incinerated at end of life. Whereas the reality, I mean, as we heard earlier, there's evidence that nappies make their way into recycling streams where they contaminate the recyclables, or they get flushed. There's lots of evidence that they still get flushed down toilets, or just littered. Certainly in South Africa, there's a big problem with informal disposal. So nappies just dumped, landing up in watercourses and that. And those aren't modeled. So that is completely missed in LCAs, that actual sort of the mismanaged fraction is not at all well modeled or understood, that the quantities, even sort of the basic data, not just the impact models, but also the fractions of what portion of nappies gets mismanaged at the end of life, how many consumers still flush their nappies, even though, you know. So I think that would be a gap. The upstream part is generally fairly well modeled. So the actual manufacturing of the plastics and the manufacturing steps, because those are easier to model, I'd say that's relatively well covered. There's still always geographical and interesting different contexts. So you could look at modeling within the specific geographical context, because often the data sets tend to be European. But I would definitely say the end of life would be the one.
Fantastic. Claudia, or Suzanne, did you want to add anything in terms of sort of information that's out there, or information that you feel, having done the report, is lacking, or that it would be good to have more information on? No. Claudia?
I think Pippa covered it well. Perhaps if I can add one point, going back to a previous question on gender, I touched upon quickly in my presentation at the end, and there was a question that was posed earlier, and I didn't have the chance to comment before. So if you allow me, I will just share a point now. Indeed, it is, so the question before was basically, wouldn't like the introduction and the strengthening the use of reusable nappies, wouldn't it pose more burden over women, for example? Because indeed, in many countries, women are still the biggest group of the population that looks after the children, so doing responsible for child caring and household chores. So yes, indeed, what we find and what we have discussed, it is a very gender sensitive issue, and depending on the country specific context, there are social considerations that are very, very important, and we could use, and policies need to be gender sensitive and address the gender inequalities as part of the move towards reusables, in fact, especially when it comes to nappies or feminine hygiene products. It can be used as a sort of a gender and women empowerment push, but it's important that the gender inequalities are addressed in parallel, and this social consideration, it's important that are voiced as well, because it is not something to be forgotten.
Fantastic. So we're down to the last few minutes of the session. I've got a final question for Suzanne. When we talk about pollution generated by single-use nappies, it is often focused on plastic pollution. Should we be talking about the carbon emissions generated too?
Yes, this is a very important point, and I actually think that the report registers in a very good way. So carbon emissions, I think, are a very essential argument, actually, and depending on the regional, on the local characteristics. So in our study, our main point, actually, when we look at the environmental issues, is climate change. For one, like on the one hand, this is because we actually don't really quantify the plastics issue, as Pippa pointed out. So this is a drawback of life cycle assessment. But what we really can define well is the climate impact, and the climate impact of disposable diapers is definitely higher than reusable diapers. It may depend on the kind of laundry, and it may depend on the power grid and the local characteristics of the power grid. But in a certain way, we can affirm that the climate issue is very important because of the waste disposal. So there is a lot of organic matter degrading in landfills and open dumps at this point of time, and this is a serious climate issue. So I think it's a very important argument at this point in time that we are living a climate emergency. And I think today we have a new IPCC report and a new manuscript coming out, which is underlining the importance of this issue.
Fantastic, thank you. As I say, we're nearly at the end of the session. I'm going to quickly go around the panel. I think what would be really good. We've talked about a lot, covered a huge amount of areas within this topic today. But I'm just going to quickly go around the panelists just to sort of sum up their top point, or the point that they'd like everyone to take away from this webinar. So if briefly, as I go around, as I say, you can just identify the thought that you'd like everyone to take away. Claudia, can I start with you, please?
Sure. Thank you so much. And it's been wonderful to join this event today. And we are very happy that the report has resonates with so many organizations, with so many countries. And there was a question that was coming in from Marta, and I'll take this opportunity to also somehow touch upon it. As UNEP, we are very committed to try and support governments and private sector in the fight to plastic pollution in general. So we are working very tirelessly to try and gather as much information on single-use plastic pollution and see how it compares with the alternatives. So we will continue. It's not a once-off webinar, and we will continue engaging with governments through the various multi-stakeholder platforms that we have, being that the Life Cycle Initiative in itself, or the UN Environment Assembly, which brings together all the heads of state, all the ministers of environment from all over the world. So we will continue engaging and trying to influence basically and support governments to put in place the right policies that promote the right product given their context. And in terms of takeaway from these webinars, I really, if I were to sum up the very key high-level messages from what we have found, is really the fact that single-use, all products really have an environmental footprint. So all we can do is really to try and choose the products that have the least of this impact on the environment. And single-use, the single-use nature of the product is the most problematic for the planet. And it's important that we take a life cycle approach before we decide on a certain action, whether it's banning or whether it's regulating or whether introducing an economic instrument. It's really important that we analyze throughout the life cycle and compare what would be the best option given the context in which we are. Thank you.
Thank you. Philippa?
Yeah, thanks for being part of this panel. I think it's great to see this discussion and the very active questions, and I'm sorry we didn't get to them all, and I think but they're picking up on all the interesting issues. So it's really nice to see it out there. I think my top point would probably echo that of Claudia's. Really, it's all about reusable rather than single use. And I think one of the problems with nappies, that the previous LCAs always tended to come out with sort of, it depends, it can go either way. And I hope we moved that argument a little further, because yes, it depends on your context. So when you look at the LCA literature, you often get both answers, because it depends, and it depends very much on, and I think we tried very hard to unpack that it depends into it. Yes, reusables can be preferred, but it depends what you can do as a consumer. So don't just throw up your hands and say it can go either way. You actually have some leverage as that consumer, and that's around how you wash them, how often you reuse them. There are aspects that are in your control. And I hope that studies advanced the whole very long-ranging nappy debate to move it forward.
Brilliant, thank you. Suzanne?
First, I really want to congratulate you, and especially Claudia and Pippa, for the report. I think it was very excellent work, and reinforcing the argument of Philippa. The consumer has really the choice and the leverage to make it different. And I think it's very interesting to discuss this in this wider frame of the circular economy. And also, this is what we try to point out in our study, the business models and the sharing economy, and thinking about, because it's difficult actually as a consumer to wash efficiently when you wash in your normal equipment at home, because how can you fill a whole load of nappies? You would have to join them for a week or even more really to fill up your machine. So as a consumer, you really can make it different, but it's a lot easier to make this different when we go to a sharing economy. So I think it's an interesting, it's a very interesting consumer good to introduce these new ideas of the circular economy. And on the other hand, I think there was this interesting question on how there are a lot of studies out now, which are the points we should study when we look at the life cycle methodology and stuff. So there is a lot of things to study on this life cycle side and on the technology side. But I just want to reinforce what I already said earlier. I think we have to study the consumer experience, and if we really can overcome this reluctance to go back to this kind of old school habit to have closed diapers. So I think this is these are my main points now. I'm really interested in study this consumer experience. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Suzanne. We've got a couple more minutes. Larissa, the thought that you'd like people to take away from this webinar?
Yeah, sure. First of all, thank you very much for this webinar. And I learned a lot with all the experts here and the great questions. And I think the idea that we're all trying to promote here is really like to rethink and our consumption production of products, of course, including nappies. And also we need to take this blame out of consumers and really try to do the systemic change upwards, really like making producers actually pay for the costs of management costs, litter costs, everything of the environmental impact of their products. So then they are already forced to make more sustainable products at the first place. And also the financial incentive from governments is really, really important to really create this level playing field with single-use plastic that's cheap, and that would also help the consumers to be more keen to go towards reusable nappies, for instance, because I think the biggest issue is around maybe convenience. So if you have these laundry systems for nappies in place in municipalities, this is a great thing that for the environment and for consumers overall.
Thanks, Larissa. Ralph, final comments?
Well, just to say that, well, thank you for the webinar. It's been fantastic, and I've learned so much. But you know, the context, as we've been saying, many speakers have said, very dependent on context. And I know that here in Vanuatu, it's a very different context to industrialized Europe, the developed West. And in fact, I think we are in a much better position to move to recyclable and you know, multiple use nappies and move away from single use. And that discussion has started. And with you know, Bambino Mia and Mama's Life and the work we've been doing and the consultation in the communities, I think you know, we're on the way to taking a bold policy step here in Vanuatu to actually be the first country to ban single-use disposable nappies. That's for babies, not for elderly people. But yeah, just watch this space. I think we will get through in the end.
Thank you, Ralph, and thank you to everybody on the panel. It's honestly been a real privilege to chair it. As I mentioned at the outset, I've been in the industry for 30 years, and certainly when we started at the beginning talking about reusable nappies, everybody thought we were mad. So to see how the conversation has moved on is absolutely fantastic. And this the session today has been brilliant, and hopefully as a platform to continue to raise this profile amongst policymakers and continue to the debate. So thank you to all the panel. Thank you to everybody who's attended. Very, very active chat and Q&A, and hopefully this will be the beginning of many more conversations amongst the group that are here. So thank you very much. If it's early in the day, enjoy the rest of the day. If it's the end of the day, have a good night. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.